Welcome back to Business Week here on Rise News. Now, Nigeria's crude oil production improved in September, rising by volume of roughly 165,429 barrels per day during the month under consideration. The country is, however, still far from meeting its OPEC quota despite the increase in output. Authorities cite oil theft, pipeline vandalism, and a waning investment in the oil and gas sector as constraints to ramping up production. This has in turn worsened the crisis in the foreign exchange market. Still with us to discuss this in more detail is Kelvin Emmanuel, CEO of Dairy Hills. Kelvin is also a public analyst and economist. We also have joining us energy analyst at Nairametrics, Omono Okonkwo. Many thanks for being with us this morning, Kelvin and Omono. I hope you're there with me. All right, Omono, let's begin with you.
I can hear you. Good morning.
Good morning, Omono. It's great to have you on the show. Let's begin with Nigeria's oil production improving in September. As we know, this will be the country's highest self-reported crude oil output since last year. What can we attribute this to?
Well, the NNPC has said that it is collaborating with some stakeholders as well as host communities to tackle environmental challenges in the Niger Delta region, as well as insecurity. As you said, crude oil theft is one of the major problems of the oil and gas industry right now, right? So the NNPC is making sure that they're doing a lot of partnerships and they're making sure that all the challenges in the Niger Delta region are being resolved. Now, to be specific, last month, the special advisor to the president on energy, Ms. Oluvehijan, she actually said that the focus of the federal government is to increase oil production, right? And they're trying so hard, to make sure that those in the Niger Delta area that are, facing a lot of poverty challenges, they give them options. So they do not have to resort to collaborating with crude oil theft perpetrators to vandalize pipelines and, create a problem for the country in its oil revenues and stuff, right? And then they are also trying to tackle environmental challenges in the Niger Delta region. So I think that action step is actually increasing oil production for us, right? Because September 2023 was when we had the highest record of crude oil production in the country for the year, right? And as you know, we have an OPEC quota of 1.7 million barrels per day, but we've not been able to reach that. In fact, that September, right, we had 1.5 million barrels per day, but if you remove condensate production, we actually had 1.3. Right? In fact, in April 2023, we recorded 998,000 barrels per day. So you see, the crude oil theft is actually hampering production for us. And this has affected our revenues from the oil sector. So it's a big problem. And the federal government, thank God, is focused on tackling that particular problem.
Yeah, most certainly a big problem. And of course, a myriad of factors playing as well. But of course, there is the interaction also between Nigeria's production levels and the foreign exchange market. Where do you see things going in light of where we currently are in relation to likely trajectory, perhaps?
Where we currently are, like I said, we are not doing so well because we haven't been able to reach our OPEC quota, right? And the oil sector is where we have our foreign exchange base, right? So if we're not producing enough, as we should, we'll definitely continue to have foreign exchange shortages, right? Now, look back to a decade ago, in the year 2000. Until about 2005, 2006, we were doing 2.2 million barrels per day, 2.5 million barrels per day. But if you look at the trajectory for 2023, like I said earlier, we've really come down to about 998,000 barrels per day and sometimes 1.1 million, right? And that also hampers forex for us, right? So where we currently are, we're not doing so well. But as you know, OPEC has reduced our oil production quota for 2024. They've reduced it from 1.7 million barrels per day to 1.38 million barrels per day from 2024. So like I read the other day that a source at NNPC said the NNPC is looking to produce about 1.8 million barrels per day before the end of 2023. Now, what will happen? right? If we're able to increase our crude oil production to maybe 1.8 or 1.7, we can make a case to OPEC to leave our OPEC quota as it is. Because imagine that we go into 2024 and we say, oh, yeah, let's produce 1.38 million barrels per day. That's already, we can achieve, because we've achieved that actually in 2023, right? But it's definitely also going to limit access to forex, because that is where we get our major foreign exchange from. That's the oil sector, right? The non-oil sector is doing so well. Yes, of course, ICT, agriculture, yes, it's doing very well. But at the end of the day, we need to ramp up oil production so we can reduce forex shortages in the country.
Right, absolutely. But I'm curious to know, are you optimistic, realistically, of course, that we can, in fact, meet the new quota before we move on to the next topic?
In 2024, yes, of course. We've done 1.3 million barrels per day, so definitely we can. And I already told you that the government is focused on tackling those issues, right? Insecurity, crude oil theft, and environmental challenges, as well as providing alternatives to the youth and other stakeholders and host communities, so we can put an end, or at least significantly reduce crude oil theft. Because when we do that, we'll be able to ramp up production.
Right. So, of course, this expectation is really hinged on the government meeting these expectations, and hopefully so. But now let's move on to more recent developments. We've seen the NUPRC move to enforce a mandatory supply of crude to local refineries recently. We can certainly see the merits of this, but many of the crude oil producers have also expressed concerns over commercial issues that may come up in such a transaction. What is your take on the likely navigable paths around this?
I think we can do both. Like, we can meet local demand. We can supply crude to modular refineries. We can supply crude to Dangote refinery. We can also export, right, to Europe to get forex. Right, so we are kind of caught between two particular issues right now. So we have to, of course, that decision by NUPRC is backed by the Petroleum Industry Act. So we need to provide crude oil to local refiners, right? Even if it definitely whatever they refine is not going to meet demand 100%, right? But we need to do that because it's part of what the PIA says. Right? And on the other hand, we also need to export this oil to markets, right? And recently, the NNPC admitted that the Russia-Ukraine war has made it kind of difficult for Nigerian crude to be bought by India, right? They rather go for cheaper crude from Russia, right? Discounted crude from Russia. Now, we need to export to Europe because Europe is one of the regions that we export our crude to, right? We need to export to Europe for us to have access to forex. But we also, at the same time, need to provide crude to local refiners. So I think we can do both. We just need to find a way to make it happen.
All right, quite a few moving parts there, but it sounds like a very optimistic approach you've got on that, and we will have to hope in accordance with that as well. But let's speak retrospectively a little bit. Let's take a quick review now of developments over the last few months. We know that for the first time in Nigeria's history, the country's oil and gas industry did not record any investment in the second quarter of 2023. What are some of the factors leading to underinvestment and divestment when we look at the industry in relation to reforms, of course?
Well, I think at this point, we all know the problems and the challenges of why we're not attracting enough investment. We've said it before, policy somersault, especially when a new government administration comes in. Everybody wants to do things their own way, right? And then we have insecurity, crude oil theft, and the rest of it. But I would rather look at, solutions, right? Because if everybody is saying, oh, well, here's the problem, we're just complaining and we're going around in circles, right? So first of all, we need transparency in the oil and gas sector. We don't have that right now. We also need data. And we also need to recognize the fact that we need to take the conversation from saying, oh, well, Nigeria is an oil and gas rich country to specifics.
Right.
Because investors only care about numbers,
Absolutely.
right? So as much as we are saying, oh, well, we need investments, we also need to make sure that we are sending the right message across to investors.
Absolutely.
I'll tell you how. For instance,
I might have to come in there,
yeah,
Omono. So might have to manage
regulator.
time a little bit. I apologize, Omono. Let's bring Calvin into the conversation.
Right.
Still on this thought. Of course, Calvin, welcome, and thanks for joining us. Of course, we've been talking about underinvestment and divestment, but we've also seen some oil companies deprioritize Nigerian portfolios, either for deep offshore activities or, better still, move where the capital can attract more returns. How do you see things playing out in terms of better attractiveness in the near future? Quite briefly, please.
Nigeria is a factor. I also think that vandalization and crude oil theft is a major factor. You could see that a lot of the IOCs are divesting away from onshore oil blocks. The block that ITO bought from Shell in 2014 had an oil spill in 2021. And you could see how that played out. So I think the IOCs are not keen about continuing the operations onshore, and they're moving away offshore, to set up rigs and to produce that. But then the question is, what is the incentive for them to produce in Nigeria, for them to make significant capital investment, considering all the talk about carbon control and the COP28 coming up in December, and the restrictions that international oil companies are beginning to have with the financing of new oil and gas investments abroad. So for me, I think it's important for the government to pay attention to insecurity in the Niger Delta, coordinate with all the security agencies. It's also important for the government to begin to move gradually away from oil, not deprioritize it, but also focus on gas, not just gas as associated gas, but solution gas, and especially condensates for non-associated gas fields. Like you have Qatar. Qatar has just signed a new, 27-year forward for delivering gas to China. And Qatar keeps signing forward contracts between 25, 27, and 30 years to deliver gas. NLNG has had its capacity utilization drop below 50%. And they are going into force majeure in 2023. I think force majeure will be anywhere around $9 billion. And that means that the dividends, for example, that the federal government will get as a 49% equity holder might drop all the way below $1 billion for the year 2023. So I think it's important for the government to focus on gas and also to look for ways to finance investments and change the business model of NNPC and move it away from being a JV partner. NNPC is producing NEPL is producing up to 120,000 barrels per day, but NNPC needs to move more into becoming an operator and controlling some of these assets onshore and deep shallow waters.
All right, well noted. I wish we had so much more time to get into a wider range of topics quite robustly, Calvin and Omono, but I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning. Hopefully we can continue this conversation another time. Many thanks for joining Business Week today.